Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'd like to tell you a story. But it's not about me. It's about my boyfriend, John. Unfortunately, he can't tell it himself. Why? Well, you'll find out soon enough. John and I went to the same prestigious college. Many people were surprised by his personality because, on one hand, he was a tough and brutal athlete. His tattoos and toned body made him incredibly attractive. And on the other hand, he didn't let this stop him from being smart and successful. My boyfriend was tough and uncompromising. He clearly knew his goal in life, and he kept moving toward it, his eye on the ball. John was always full of burning ambitions. He was preparing himself for a career in politics. But one day, everything turned upside down. It happened at one of the football training sessions. John was just a monster on the field. He aggressively pushed rivals aside, and even his teammates were afraid of him. And then, when his next attack ended with a touchdown, he took off his helmet and didn't notice the ball flying toward him. John got hit on the head and fell. I immediately ran out onto the field, and when I picked him up, he looked at me in surprise and asked, "Where am I?" I thought my boyfriend had a concussion, and I took him to the medical center, but they said there was nothing wrong with him, just a minor bruise. He was recommended to lie up and have a rest, so me and John went home. When I was putting him to bed, he looked so confused. I'd never seen him like this before, so I left John alone and went about my business. I could hear him talking to himself in a low voice, and that was really weird. About an hour later, John came out of the bedroom and said he wanted some chocolate muffins, and I said I would run to the coffee shop to get them. But my boyfriend stopped me and said he'd bake them himself. What? I couldn't believe my ears. He'd never done any baking before, and usually he didn't think it was something a man was supposed to do. I didn't stop him, but I watched in amazement as he worked quickly and deftly in the kitchen. After only a couple hours, the fragrant pastries were ready. And you know what? I'd never tasted such delicious muffins before. I looked at John, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, you might have guessed that after the ball incident, my boyfriend changed dramatically. He left football, saying it was a rough and violent game. At the debate club, where he was a chairman, John introduced new rules that differed on a wider view for the respect and tolerance of other people's opinions. Yeah, and we even started spending more time together. We cooked unusual dishes, went to sales at fashion salons, and we even cried together over a sad movie. My boyfriend became so much more gentle and kind. I didn't know what had happened, but I really liked him this way. Once, he even wanted to take part in Comic-Con, and he was working on a cosplay for the longest time. I watched him working day and night, and I saw that he was happy as a clam. He put all his heart into the costume, and no wonder he took first place among all the cosplayers. John said that all his life he'd wanted to be a fashion designer. "Weren't you going to pursue a career in politics?" I asked, surprised at what he'd just said. "Have you lost your marbles?" my boyfriend replied. "That's so boring." This was the new, incredible John. Our coupledom moved to a new level when suddenly he disappeared. Just didn't come home one day. I was waiting for him all night, but he never showed up. He didn't come to college, and none of our friends saw him. I was sick with worry. Had something happened to my wonderful John? A couple of days passed, but he still didn't come back. He didn't return any of my calls or texts. In the end, I just couldn't stand it, and I went to the police. There, I told the officer everything that had happened, and he said that he would look for John. And so, a week passed. I kept waiting for the police to call and tell me terrible news. But something very different happened. John appeared out of the blue, as suddenly as he vanished. He just came home and said he needed to rest before training. I didn't understand what was going on. When I asked where he'd been, my boyfriend just said he didn't remember. I hugged him, but John grinned and said, "Why are you being so lovey-dovey?" Yeah, it appears he'd gone back to how he was before, tough and brutal. He took up football again and threw away the costume with which he'd won at Comic-Con. "What a load of crap! How could someone wear this?" he said. "It knocked my socks off." What was happening to him? Where had he gone for a week? And how did he get that scar on his forehead? I tried several times to get the truth out of him, but John just brushed me off and said it didn't matter. The main thing for him was to pass the exams successfully and get a job as an assistant secretary in the state Congress. I missed the John that I'd baked muffins with, and the John who'd sat with me in the park to watch the sunset. He was so happy then, and it made me feel happy too. whatever had happened, I just couldn't get through to him now, and I became determined to find out exactly what had happened. Then, one day, the officer who was looking for John called and said he had some information about my boyfriend. John spent the entire week at the mansion of his father, Senator Furlong. What was he doing there? I asked, but the officer replied that he didn't know, and he couldn't do anything else to help. I had to find out what was going on with my boyfriend, so I got in my car and I went to the senator's house. To my surprise, Mr. Furlong agreed to meet me. I had never met him before, but I noticed how similar he and John were. The senator was just as tough and uncompromising. He replied that his son had spent the week at his mansion because he needed to focus before important exams. I asked why his son had changed so much since returning to college, but the senator replied that he didn't know what I was talking about. But where did he get the scar on his forehead? I was so pissed off. With my outburst, John's father suddenly became stern and asked me to leave immediately. He was obviously hiding something, but I just couldn't figure it out. What was he hiding? As I was walking to my car, someone called me. It was a girl, a little younger than me. She said her name was Kayla, and that we needed to talk, in private. We agreed to meet in the cafe nearby. About an hour later, we were sitting at a table together. Kayla said she was John's younger sister and knew what had really happened to him. And there, in the cafe, she told me his sad and incredible story. It turns out that, even from childhood, my boyfriend was soft and kind. He loved playing with dolls and wanted to become a fashion designer, but their father was a tough tyrant who wanted to raise a son just like himself. He was trying to educate John, punish him for what he thought was silly and girly, and when that didn't work, he turned to psychiatrists. They took little John to a psychiatric clinic, where he spent an entire summer. And when he came back, he was entirely different, just like his father. Apparently, they brainwashed him by hypnosis and medication. The senator was rejoicing that his son had started to live up to his expectations. And as time went on, John graduated from high school and went to college. But when a ball hit John's head, he became his real self again. His true identity was released. But his father found out. He saw a news article on the Comic-Con event and got very angry. He took his son away and gave him back to the psychiatrists. John had an operation, electrical stimulation of the cerebral cortex, all so he could be turned back into what his father wanted him to be. When my boyfriend was taken to the psych ward, he was crying and begging his father not to do this to him. He was truly happy with how he was living, but his father didn't listen. Kayla finished her story and asked me to save her brother, because she just couldn't. Her father wouldn't let her go far and watched over her like a hawk. I was, of course, shocked by what I'd heard. Such cruelty to his own children. It just blew my mind. I promised Kayla I would do everything I could, and I told her I would never leave John. On the way back, I thought about what she told me. How could the senator sacrifice his own son's happiness? And just so he could get John to become a copy of himself. I started thinking, how could I get John back to his real self? Could I go to the police? But Senator Furlong was in such a powerful position. They probably would never even listen to me. I threw my hands up in such total despair, and then a sudden idea came to me. When I got back to college, John was at a football training. I waited until it was over, and my boyfriend took off his helmet. "I'm sorry, John, but I have to do this to you." I took the ball and hit his head with it as hard as I could. The impact knocked him down to the ground. I waited for him to get up, give me a hug, and go make muffins. But John just looked at me and said angrily, "Sarah, are you out of your mind? What do you think you're doing?" I realized my plan hadn't worked. Apparently, the operation he'd been given was much more effective than hypnosis, and I couldn't fix it with just a hit from a ball. John scolded me for being so irresponsible and frivolous, and in that moment, I looked into his eyes and saw all the pain and despair he felt. John's real self was hidden somewhere deep inside, and he could see what I was doing. He understood. So please, I'm asking you to share this story with others. Maybe the senator will realize that he's torturing his child, and maybe, just maybe, he'll let John be himself. After all, everyone deserves to be happy.
Hi, I'm Elliot. Now I'm 22. As you may have guessed, for almost 10 years, I was treated for a non-existent disease. How can this be, you may ask? Why couldn't any doctor make a diagnosis? Maybe I just made up the disease. Take your time. At the end of the video, you will find out what I was really ill with, and why no one was able to cure me. It all started when I was 12. I was the only child. I don't remember my father. He left when I was just a baby, and my mother took care of my upbringing. The kind of pedagogue she was. She was very strict and demanding. My mother was a big banker and lived dead by the rules. She also required me to follow these rules. It was driving me nuts. That's why my mother and I were always fighting. She was just punishing me without even listening. I was bent out of shape about her. You can say that our relationship could not be worse. My mother used to say she was worried about me, and that's why she kept a tight rein on me. Then, one day, I got sick. It was an absolutely trivial cold, but I could see how scared my mother was for me. She didn't go to work and spent the whole day with me. The doctor came to our house and treated me. My mother was very kind and did not send me to bed at 10 o'clock as usual, but allowed me to watch TV. Now I realized what I needed to do to get whatever floated my boat from my mum. And very soon, I took advantage of it. When she refused to take me to Disneyland because my homework wasn't done, I pretended to be ill. A doctor was immediately called. He examined me and, of course, did not find any disease. Then I started coughing, clutching my stomach, and moaning piteously. The doctor was scared and still prescribed me some medications, and my mother immediately promised that she would take me to the amusement park as soon as I felt better. Since then, I started using this method more and more often. I read the symptoms of all the terrible diseases on the internet and began to simulate them successfully, so as to not do what my mother demanded of me and get everything I wanted from her. Various doctors tested me, but could not understand what was happening to me. I was examined, but nothing was found. A year later, I had a bunch of different diagnoses, and my medical history was as thick as an encyclopedia. I could faint, convulse, slobber, and talk plausibly about my hallucinations. My mother was terribly confused. She followed all my whims and was afraid to say anything against it. Of course, then I felt better. After a while, she would start demanding discipline and order from me again, and my mysterious illness would return. This went on for several years. Sometimes I felt better, sometimes I found myself in a hospital bed. My mother spared a lot of money for my examination, but it, of course, did not give any results. Once, she even suspected that I was faking an illness, so I had to feign a particularly violent attack and declare that I would soon be gone. My mother was extremely scared and didn't even think about suspecting me anymore. In short, I made myself comfortable with the whole situation. By the time I was 20, without defining clearly what was wrong with me, I was assigned a physical disability status. I did whatever I wanted and got whatever I wanted. What are you asking? Do I have a conscience, you're asking? Of course! Sometimes I worry about my mother, but then I remember that she was a strong woman and can cope with any troubles. Besides, my lie had gone so far that I couldn't confess. But suddenly, I began to notice something unusual about my mother. She lost weight and looked bad. Increasingly, my mother began to skip work and spend time in bed. She said she wasn't feeling well. I could do whatever I wanted, but my mother didn't pay any attention to it. It was as if she didn't care about me. What's happening? And then, one day, everything became clear. One night, she got sick. An ambulance arrived and took my mother to the hospital. She was examined and told that everything was very bad. She had coronary heart disease. This news made me feel devastated. How so? I had been feigning an illness for so long that I didn't notice my mom was really ill. I felt guilty for her and decided to save my mother at all costs. We started treatment. The best clinics, the most modern diagnostic methods, the coolest doctors treated my mother to stop the disease. We flew to Germany and she spent a whole month in one of the best clinics in Europe. I was with her all the time. She was worried about me and said that I was terminally ill myself, but I still took care of her. My mother was very grateful for my support, and I couldn't tell her that I was right. Money for my mother's treatments was drying up. I spared no expense and spent her savings. I didn't make any money myself yet, and my efforts brought results. The disease receded. We couldn't beat it completely, but my mother was much better. She became more cheerful and much more vigorous. She even returned to her strictness and exactness. but I was happy about it. Over the past few months, my mom and I seem to have become friends. Our relationship improved, but I was still afraid to tell her about the deception that had been going on for almost a decade. And my mom kept thinking that I was terminally ill, and none of the doctors could help me. This made me very sad. And then, something happened to me that I didn't expect at all. One day, we received a notification that our house would be taken away from us for debts. What? Why? I began to study my mother's financial history and was horrified to find out that she was bankrupt. How so? It turns out that over the past 10 years, my mother had spent a huge sum of money on my examinations. Her bank was operating at a loss. And after she was diagnosed as having CHD, and I spent money to save her, the bank went bust. It was like bolts from the blue. My mother lost her job and earnings, and we were left with only debts. Very soon, we lost the house, and my mother and I had to move into a small apartment. We started to live very modestly. My mother did not despair, and said that everything would be fine. If we were strict with ourselves and started living by the rules again, we would succeed. She hoped to cure me of a non-existent illness, and I felt guilty, because I was the one who had made her sick and then poor. So I decided to fix it. It was my responsibility now. I had to get a job, and immediately the one that would bring a good income. So I applied to a large IT company for a manager position. As expected, I was refused. After all, I had no work experience at all. What should I do? But then I had a brilliant idea. According to the law, companies did not have the right to refuse work to people with disabilities. But I was disabled for health reasons, so I tried again, this time providing all my medical papers. Apparently, the management of the IT company was afraid of lawsuits, and I was hired. My non-existent illness helped me again. I started working and earning money for my mother and me. She was very proud of me and felt guilty, thinking that she was forcing her terminally ill son to work. And I was just burning with shame. You see, I was sound as a bell, but I couldn't tell my mother that. The truth I was cheating on her for 10 years would just kill her, so I kept silent and continued to struggle with my non-existent illness. Everything was going well. My job provided for my mother and me, and I met a girl, Susan, and soon she became my girlfriend. She also thought I was terminally ill. Susan admired me for sacrificing myself to save my mother. She thought I was a very good person, but I tied myself into knots with my lies and just didn't know how to cut the tangle. And one day, something happened that I was so afraid of. My mother was sick again. She was taken to the hospital and examined again. The disease returned, and everything became worse than it had been. My mother was fading away. I couldn't watch her like this. I realized that I loved her and hated myself for being such a bad son. A few days later, I got a call from the hospital saying that my mother was gone. So that was the end. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I was a bad man, and I knew that. My whole life was a lie that only brought trouble. I couldn't lie anymore, so I told Susan the whole truth. I also told people at work that I had deceived them. I was not disabled. No wonder Susan left me right away and I got fired from my job. But I wasn't upset. I didn't deserve to have a girlfriend and a good job. First, I must overcome my illness. After all, it really existed, but no doctor could cure it. Because this disease was called egoism, and one could only get rid of it by his own efforts. If you sometimes feel like you are being too selfish, you must know that it is never too late to admit your guilt and make things right. This channel helped me to tell my story, and I am very grateful to it. Write your stories about cheating in the comments. It's never too late to admit your mistakes.
Hi, my name is Marla, and I want to tell you about my curse. My whole life, I've been getting stuck in different places. Hey, what are you laughing at? It's a real curse. For example, some people always lose things. Some can't keep their laces tied, and I get stuck. If you think there's nothing bad about that, then you're wrong. It might be worse than any horror movie you've ever seen. Soon enough, you'll find out everything. And by the way, subscribe to the channel if you're interested in what's gonna happen next. Last year, we threw a huge party to celebrate our graduation from college. It was a big event for everybody, and we rented a luxury penthouse. I spent the whole evening dancing, having fun, chatting with friends, and before I noticed, I'd gotten drunk. Eventually, I decided to go outside to get some fresh air. I took the elevator down, but then it got stuck. It was really unpleasant and super frightening. I pressed the emergency call button, but no one answered. And of course, I'd left my phone upstairs. I had no choice but to yell for help. I don't know how much time I spent in that elevator, but at some point, I just got tired of shouting and decided to take a nap. Well, you know how it is at parties. They really only noticed that I'd disappeared about 2 hours later. When my friends managed to open the doors to the elevator, they were greeted with a hilarious sight. I was sleeping on the elevator floor, all dirty and messy. It really wasn't all that funny for me. When they later showed me a video they'd taken of me, I asked them all to delete it. It was just so horrible. I was so ashamed of my behavior. It was probably the most shameful incident of my whole life. It was, unsurprisingly, connected to my curse. However, at that party, I also met Tom. He was one of the ones who'd found me sleeping in the elevator, and he'd carried me out. When I woke up the next day, I found a phone number written on my hand, next to a request. Call me. I dialed the number, and the guy picked up and asked me, "Well, how are you?" That was Tom. We started chatting, and then we started dating. It must have been love at first sight. We became boyfriend and girlfriend almost immediately. He was just like me. He also liked to hang out and just be the center of attention, and he always came to the rescue when I got stuck somewhere. We'd been dating for 6 months when something happened that I hadn't been expecting at all. One day, he called me and said that we needed to break up. It was over between us. It was all so sudden. I didn't know what to say. But why? Was the only thing I could ask. Tom replied that he was scared of my curse. He believed that if he kept seeing me, one day I'd pass it on to him, somehow. I mean, what the hell? I couldn't believe it. Tom was breaking up with me because of a stupid superstition? I told him he was an idiot to believe in something like that, but he just didn't want to listen and hung up on me. I wanted to call him back so bad and pick a fight, but he wouldn't answer the phone. I was just so mad at him. I felt super depressed for 2 weeks. I kept waiting for Tom to come to his senses, but he never called. In the end, I calmed down a little, but I was left in a horrible mood at the end of summer. I still had a whole week before I had to go back to work, and to somehow distract myself, I decided to fly somewhere far away. I bought a tour to a small tropical island in the Caribbean, and I decided that there, far away from everyone else, I'd forget that traitor Tom. The very next day, I boarded a plane and went on vacation. The island was very far away, and it was incredibly difficult to get there. It didn't even have its own airfield, and tourists had to be brought there by seaplane. However, the hard road was worth it. The island was a real paradise. Clean white beaches, tropical nature, and a single hotel in the entire resort. The balcony in my room had a stunning view of the entire island. I felt that after a vacation like this, I was sure to return home completely refreshed. But no such luck. As soon as I checked into the room and went for a walk, I immediately met someone I hadn't expected to see. It was Tom. Moreover, there was a girl with him. What were they doing there? Tom noticed me as well. He immediately got angry, came up to me and asked, "Are you stalking me?" I was at a loss and could only reply that I'd flown there to rest before beginning my work at the company. Tom said, "Leave me alone. We've already broken up." He took his girlfriend's hand and they left. I just watched him go, and then it all began to sink in. Tom hadn't left me because of my curse. He'd left me because he'd found someone else. I mean, how dare he? What made it worse was that by some incredible chance, we ended up on the same small island in the middle of an ocean. And, of course, we'd have to spend a whole week there together. I wanted to fly back immediately, but the next plane was coming the following week. I knew I was in trouble. My whole vacation was ruined, and all you guys said that getting stuck somewhere wasn't going to be a big deal. I decided to avoid Tom as much as possible. But the island was so small that it was kind of impossible. I had to watch every day as he hugged and kissed his girlfriend. It felt like he was doing it even more just to purposely annoy me. I mean, what a bastard. Tom decided to completely ruin my vacation, but I decided I wasn't gonna let him do that. I was gonna ruin his romantic vacation instead. I wasn't the one stuck on the island with him. He was the one who was stuck on the island with me. While my ex was lying around on the beach without a care in the world, I sneakily stole his sunscreen. In the evening, I was so happy to see a sunburn all over his face when we met in the hotel lobby. Other vacationers also smiled when they saw the unfortunate guy. Even his girlfriend looked uncomfortable being next to him. Of course, Tom knew I'd done it, but I wasn't done yet. I began to put my underwear with love notes into his room and smear lipstick all over his shirts. What for? It drove his girlfriend to hysterics, and I loved listening to them fight. She thought Tom was cheating on her. He, of course, knew perfectly well who was doing all of it, and was seething with rage whenever he saw me. On the third day, he came up to me and said angrily, "You want a war? You're gonna get one." He started to give me just as much trouble as I'd been giving him. The whole hotel was watching it all and probably thought we were real freaks. Honestly, who in their right mind would be so obsessed with ruining each other's vacations on such a tropical paradise? But this small piece of land was just too small for the both of us. And just like that, my week on the island was finally coming to an end. I couldn't wait to get out of there. On the last day, they threw a farewell party for everyone. Naturally, my ex-boyfriend came as well. He looked at me with a suspicious grin crossing his face. What was he up to? I found out the answer to that in the middle of the party, when the music suddenly stopped and a video appeared on the big screen. And, oh God, no, please, turn that off right now. It was the video from last year of my elevator fiasco. Everyone was looking at the screen and laughing. I felt myself blush from shame and anger. It was definitely Tom's doing, and I was just about ready to strangle him. Everyone started pointing at me and laughing. I just couldn't stand the shame any longer, and I ran to my room. Tom had won. I never wanted to see him again in my entire life. He only ever made me feel awful. I stayed in my room until it was time to board the plane so I wouldn't have to face that idiot again. When I was told that the plane was waiting at the pier, I picked up my bag and went to the elevator. There, I got inside, and just as the doors had almost closed, somebody held them open. Oh, no, not again! Tom got in the elevator. He saw me and visibly shuddered. It seemed he'd also been sitting in his room until the last moment to avoid running into me. But as soon as the elevator started down, the lights flickered and it stopped. You might say that, oh, it's impossible. But I told you, this is my curse. It always happens at the worst possible moment. I saw how scared Tom looked. He pressed all the buttons, but nothing was happening. We looked at each other and realized that we were going to be late for the plane. There was almost no time left. Tom looked around the elevator and noticed a hatch in the ceiling. He opened it and climbed out, and I followed him. We stood on the roof of the elevator and saw that there was really only one way to get out, by climbing back to back up the shaft. We hated each other, but there was nothing we could really do. We had to make it to that plane. So we pressed our backs together and started climbing. I couldn't believe that this was happening to me. I was counting the seconds until I could finally cut Tom out of my life forever. We got out of the elevator and ran to the pier. There was no one around. It was unsettling. And then I heard Tom scream, "No, it can't be! Wait!" I caught up to him and saw a plane far away in the sky. They'd left without us. Tom got a message from his girlfriend, and she told him that she was breaking up with him. We ran back to the hotel, but found only one worker there who said that the tour season was over and that everyone had already left the island. And also, rainy season was coming, and we'd be cut off from the world for several months. Yeah, I told you. My story is the perfect plot for a second-rate horror movie. I'm stuck on an island with the person I hate the most in the whole world. And I think Tom is now convinced that my curse has passed on to him. He was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. We don't know what to do next. Who do you think is to blame for this whole situation? Please, write your comments down below, because reading them is basically the only entertainment I'm gonna get in this cursed island.